In the year 260, a Roman emperor knelt in the dust before a Persian king. Then the Persian king used his back as a mounting step to climb onto his horse, in front of both armies. Rome had never lost an emperor to capture before. It would happen exactly once. And the empire responsible wasn't some barbarian horde sweeping out of the forests. It was an empire as disciplined, as wealthy, and as ancient as Rome itself. It had its own emperors, its own bureaucracy, its own state religion, its own version of Rome's entire imperial machinery, running in parallel for 400 years on the other side of a single river. Most people today have never even heard its name. Rome conquered nearly everyone it ever fought. Gauls, Carthaginians, Greeks, Egyptians, Britons, one by one, they all eventually broke. Persia didn't. For 400 years, these two empires fought across the same stretch of desert, traded the same border cities back and forth a dozen times each, and neither side could finish the other. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how that happened. How an empire most people can't even place on a map fought Rome to a bloody standstill for longer than the United States has existed. And how a rivalry that old ended up destroying both empires at once in the same generation, within a few years of each other. For nearly 4 centuries, Rome's great eastern rival had been Parthia, a loose feudal empire of Persian and Iranian nobility, powerful enough to hold its own on the battlefield, famous enough that the word Parthian shot still describes a retreating archer firing backward at full gallop, but never quite unified enough to be truly dangerous. Parthian kings ruled through negotiation with semi-independent nobles who could, and often did, ignore them entirely. In 224 AD, that changed. A regional ruler named Ardashir I led a rebellion against the last Parthian king, Artabanus V, killed him personally in battle according to Persian tradition, and did something the Parthians never managed in 400 years of ruling. He unified Persia under a single, centralized crown, answerable to no rival nobility. Ardashir didn't just want a new dynasty. He wanted continuity with something older, the empire of Cyrus and Darius, the Achaemenid Persia that Alexander the Great had shattered 5 centuries earlier. He revived Zoroastrianism as the state religion, built fire temples across the empire as a deliberate political statement, and made a direct, explicit claim. Persia was rising again, and everything Rome held east of the Euphrates had once belonged to Persian kings, and therefore belonged to Persian kings again. Rome had spent 4 centuries fighting a fractured feudal rival. It could usually outlast through sheer patience. It was about to face something else entirely, a unified, centralized, ideologically driven empire that considered half of Rome's eastern territory stolen property, with a founding myth built specifically to justify taking it back. I want to be direct about something here. This wasn't a barbarian uprising or a desperate breakaway state. Ardashir built a state with the explicit, stated goal of reversing 500 years of history, reclaiming land by pointing not at recent conquest, but at ancient right, at a golden age Rome itself had helped erase. Rome had faced plenty of enemies who wanted territory. It had never faced one that wanted its own resurrection, with the paperwork and the religion to back the claim up. Ardashir's son, Shapur I, inherited his father's ambition and doubled it. Between 253 and 260 AD, he invaded Roman Syria 3 separate times, sacked the great city of Antioch, one of the largest cities in the entire Roman world, not once but twice, and marched off tens of thousands of Roman prisoners and skilled craftsmen to build new cities deep inside Persia, cities built, quite literally, by captured Roman labor. In 260, the Roman Emperor Valerian personally marched east with an army to end the threat once and for all. Near the city of Edessa, Shapur trapped him. Valerian's army was surrounded, exhausted, and reportedly gutted by plague sweeping through the ranks. He tried to negotiate. He offered gold. Shapur seized him instead, along with his entire remaining staff. It was the only time in Roman history a sitting emperor was captured alive by a foreign power. Shapur didn't just imprison him. According to Persian and later Roman sources, he used Valerian as a literal human footstool whenever he needed to mount his horse, dragged out for the purpose, in public, for years, until the emperor died in captivity. Some accounts, likely exaggerated but repeated for centuries afterward across both Roman and Persian retellings, claimed his skin was stuffed with straw and hung in a Persian temple as a permanent trophy of the victory. Shapur had the humiliation carved permanently into a cliff face at Nakhche-Rustam, where it still stands today, weathered but unmistakable. Valerian on his knees before Shapur's horse, forever in solid rock, for anyone who has ever wondered exactly how confident an empire can get. Rome had just discovered exactly what kind of rival it was dealing with. What made the Sassanids so dangerous wasn't just ambition, it was the cataphract, a fully armored cavalryman on a fully armored horse, covered head to hoof in overlapping iron and bronze scale, carrying a long lance braced under the arm for maximum impact. A cataphract charge hit like a battering ram made of metal and muscle, capable of punching straight through a standing line of infantry before the soldiers even had time to brace. Roman infantry formations that had broken every enemy line in the Mediterranean world, that had shattered Greek phalanxes, Gallic warbands, Carthaginian mercenaries, found themselves physically unable to stop a wall of iron horses moving at a full gallop. Behind the cataphracts rode horse archers, trained from childhood to fire accurately at a full gallop, retreating and shooting backward in the same motion. Rome had faced horse archers before, in the Parthians. It had never faced horse archers backed by heavy shock cavalry this disciplined, this well-supplied, or this centrally organized into a single professional force answering to one crown. And unlike the Parthians, the Sassanids built proper siege infrastructure, towers, rams, sappers tunneling under walls, and even war elephants brought in from India for shock value against cities that had never seen one and had no idea how to defend against one. What had once been Rome's exclusive advantage in the ancient world, patient, engineered siege warfare, became a contest between equals, fought city wall by city wall. Rome had spent centuries perfecting the discipline that broke every army it faced. For the first time, it was facing a rival who had studied that exact discipline, understood precisely why it worked, and built a systematic answer to every part of it. A century later, Rome tried to settle the score permanently. In 363 AD, Emperor Julian, a philosopher soldier obsessed with matching the glory of Alexander the Great, led one of the largest Roman armies ever assembled deep into Persian territory, aiming straight for the Sassanid capital at Ctesiphon, intending to end the dynasty entirely. He reached the walls. He won a battle just outside them. He couldn't take the city itself, and with his supply lines stretched impossibly thin through hostile desert, Julian made the fateful decision to burn his own supply fleet on the Tigris and retreat overland, harassed constantly by Persian cavalry that never let the retreating column rest. During that retreat, in a minor skirmish that should have meant nothing in the larger campaign, Julian was fatally wounded by a spear through the ribs. Historians still argue whether it came from a Persian soldier or a disgruntled Roman one, since Julian had made plenty of enemies within his own army over religion. Either way, the emperor who marched east to conquer Persia died retreating from it within days, and his panicked successor was forced to sign a deeply humiliating peace, surrendering Roman territory that had stood for over a century, just to get what remained of the army home alive. 400 years into this rivalry, and Rome still hadn't won. It had simply learned, over and over, in one failed campaign after another, exactly how expensive losing to Persia could be. By the 6th century, under a king named Khosrow I, remembered in Persian tradition as Khosrow of the Immortal Soul, the Sassanid Empire reached its administrative and cultural peak. He reformed taxation into a fixed, predictable system that funded the state without ruining farmers in bad years, reorganized the military into a professional standing force paid directly by the crown rather than raised from noble levies, and turned his capital, Ctesiphon, into one of the great cities of the ancient world, famous even among its enemies for its libraries and its royal gardens. He was strong enough that the Roman Emperor Justinian, the same Justinian busy reconquering Italy and North Africa from barbarian kingdoms in the west, paid Persia enormous annual tribute simply to keep the eastern border quiet while he fought his wars elsewhere. Historians still call the treaty that bought this peace, bluntly and almost sarcastically, the Eternal Peace. It lasted 8 years before both sides were fighting again. Persia controlled the middle of the Silk Road, taxing every caravan of silk, spice, and precious stone moving between China and Rome. Growing wealthy on trade, it didn't even have to produce. While Rome fought barbarian kingdoms in the west and slowly bankrupted itself doing it, Persia grew rich simply by sitting in the middle of the ancient world's trade routes and collecting tolls. The two empires had reached something like an equilibrium. Two exhausted giants who had learned, through centuries of bloody experience, roughly how far they could push each other. It would not last. In 602 AD, under Khosrow II, Persia launched the largest invasion of Roman territory in the entire history of the rivalry, using the murder of a Roman emperor as pretext for a war of total conquest. And for over 20 years, it looked like Persia was finally, actually going to win outright after 4 centuries of trying. Persian armies took Antioch again, then Jerusalem in 614, where they captured the true cross itself, Christianity's most sacred relic, and carried it back to Ctesiphon as a war trophy, a catastrophic symbolic blow to a Christian Roman Empire that had built its entire identity around that relic's safekeeping. Then they took Egypt in 619, cutting off Rome's grain supply and starving Constantinople of its most essential import. Then Persian cavalry patrols pushed within sight of the walls of Constantinople itself, closer than any enemy had come in centuries. For a few years in the 610s, the Roman Empire controlled little more than the city of Constantinople and scattered coastal fortresses clinging to the Mediterranean. Persia held more territory, stretching from Egypt to the Bosphorus, than it ever had in 400 years of trying. What strikes me about this moment is how completely it gets erased from the popular version of this story. Most people, if they know anything about Rome's fall, know the western half collapsed to Germanic tribes in the 5th century. Almost nobody realizes that a couple of centuries later, the eastern half, the half that actually survived and called itself Rome for another 1,000 years, came within a hair's breadth of being conquered entirely by Persia. If a handful of battles had gone differently in the 620s, we might not think of Rome as the empire that endured. We might think of it as the empire Persia finally finished off after 400 years of trying. Rome's emperor, Heraclius, responded with something close to desperation. He melted down church silver and gold, an almost unthinkable act for a deeply Christian empire, to pay for an entirely new army. And instead of defending Constantinople directly, he did something almost no one expected, something no Roman emperor had successfully done in centuries. He invaded Persia itself, at its weakest defended point. He bypassed the fortified frontier entirely, sailed troops around it by sea, and struck directly at Persia's undefended heartland, the mirror image of what Julian had failed to do 2.5 centuries earlier, except executed with the patience and caution Julian never had. At the Battle of Nineveh in 627, fought in near total darkness during a solar eclipse that both sides took as an omen, Heraclius crushed the main Persian field army in a battle so brutal that near the end, both commanders were reportedly fighting hand-to-hand themselves, exhausted men swinging at each other in the dark. Khosrow II, the king who had come within sight of conquering Rome outright and had held more Roman territory than any Persian ruler in history, was overthrown and executed by his own son and court within months of the defeat. The war that Persia had been winning for 20 straight years ended in total, humiliating collapse in a matter of weeks. Neither side had actually won this war. Both of them had simply bled each other white, spending every reserve of soldiers and gold they had left. By 630 AD, Rome and Persia had fought on and off for over 400 years. And in this final, exhausting round, both empires had emptied their treasuries, drained their best soldiers, and shattered the administrative systems that had held them together for centuries. Neither empire noticed, or particularly cared, about a smaller power gathering in the deserts to the south, recently unified under a new religious and political movement out of Arabia, a region both empires had always treated as a strategic afterthought. What I find most haunting about this story is the timing. Persia and Rome had just fought the single most exhausting war of their 400-year rivalry. And the very moment it ended, an entirely new force arrived at exactly the moment both empires were least able to resist it, having just spent everything they had on each other. Neither side actually lost this war to the other. They both lost it, a few years later, to whoever showed up next while they were too weak to stand. Within a decade, Arab armies shattered the exhausted, demoralized Sassanid military at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah in 636, then finished the empire completely at the Battle of Nahavand in 642, a defeat Arab histories themselves would later call the victory of victories. By 651, the Sassanid Empire, the rival that had fought Rome to a bloody standstill for 4 centuries, that had captured a Roman emperor and conquered Jerusalem, had ceased to exist entirely, its last king dying a fugitive, murdered for his jewelry by a miller who didn't recognize him. Rome survived, barely, reduced to a fraction of its former territory, stripped of Egypt and Syria and Jerusalem for good this time, but still standing as the Byzantine Empire for another 800 years. Persia, the empire that had captured a Roman emperor and once conquered Jerusalem, simply disappeared as a political entity in less than 20 years, faster than almost any great power in ancient history. But disappearing as a political entity isn't the same as disappearing entirely. Persian bureaucracy, Persian court culture, Persian science, astronomy, and philosophy didn't die with the Sassanid crown. They were absorbed directly into the new Islamic civilization that replaced it, and within a few generations, Persian officials, Persian scholars, and Persian administrative methods were running the very empire that had just conquered them. The empire that fought Rome to an exhausted draw for 400 years didn't survive as a state. It survived as something else entirely, as the cultural DNA of whoever conquered it next, absorbed rather than erased. If that sounds familiar, it's because we've told a version of this exact story before. How Persian civilization has survived total military collapse again and again for 5,000 years, outlasting every empire that ever tried to erase it. That's the whole story in our video on Iran. Watch it now.